The cameras had barely stopped flashing when whispers began to ripple through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. A new royal honor had just been announced, an unprecedented move by King Charles himself. And it didn't go to Prince William or the loyal Princess Anne. No, the new title went to Zara Tindall, the horse-riding royal who had never asked for a crown, never sought attention, and yet now stood in a spotlight brighter than ever. And somewhere thousands of miles away, in a Montecito mansion that had begun to feel more like a gilded cage, Prince Harry was said to have gone pale when he heard the news. The man who had once stood second in line to the throne now found himself empty-handed, cut off, ignored, and, as insiders put it, begging for inheritance. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You have to wonder, how does a prince reach that point? How does the boy who once walked behind his mother's coffin, the global icon of empathy and rebellion, end up pleading for something that was once his birthright? And more importantly, why would his own family turn their backs on him in favor of a cousin who had never even held an official title before? The answers, as you're about to see, are buried deep in the crown's most guarded traditions, where blood, loyalty, and silence determine who keeps the gold and who gets the door slammed in their face. But before we dive into the drama that has left the monarchy trembling again, picture this: a long dining table in the private residence of Highgrove House. Candles flicker. A select few royals sit around in hushed conversation. King Charles at the head, eyes sharp and weary, Camilla nursing her wine, and silent but alert, William expressionless. And then, almost casually, Charles announces a decision that sends invisible cracks through the entire Windsor family. Zara Tindall, Anne's daughter, once just the equestrian, would now receive a royal title and trust responsibility directly under the new monarch's private estate. Harry? Nothing. Not a single mention of his name. Imagine the silence that followed. The forks midair. The faint tightening of Anne's jaw. The unspoken realization that this was not just a ceremonial gesture. It was a message. The crown rewards loyalty, not lineage. And for Prince Harry, who had traded centuries of royal protocol for the Hollywood spotlight, that message couldn't have hit harder. It wasn't supposed to be this way. When Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in 2020, many assumed it was temporary, a rebellious phase, a time for them to find their footing outside the firm. But the tone of their departure was sharper than anyone predicted. Words like racism, betrayal, and institutional cruelty painted the monarchy in shadows it had fought decades to erase. Harry didn't just leave the royal family. He torched the bridge on his way out. Still, many thought love would heal it. That time would dull the resentment. After all, Harry was the Queen's grandson, Charles's son, and William's brother. Family comes first, doesn't it? But the monarchy isn't just a family. It's a machine, a centuries-old institution that thrives on loyalty and punishes defiance, no matter how heartfelt the reasons behind it. And in the months following Queen Elizabeth's passing, King Charles made it painfully clear that his reign would not be one of sentimentality. It would be about preservation, of image, legacy, and order. When news leaked that Zara Tindall was to be granted a symbolic yet powerful new title, Keeper of the Royal Heritage Fund, few outside the palace walls grasped its significance. But to insiders, it was monumental. It meant control over certain ancestral estates, trust access, and, perhaps most symbolically, the Queen's personal equestrian foundation, a project Zara had supported since childhood. To Harry, it meant something else entirely, that every trace of his mother's legacy, every memory tied to the royal estate, was being locked away from him. Harry begged. A palace insider later whispered to the press. He wanted inclusion in at least one family trust. But the paperwork was already signed. His name wasn't even on the draft. Begging. The word alone shocked the public. Prince Harry begging? The same man who once stood shoulder to shoulder with world leaders and military veterans, now pleading with his father for inheritance access? It sounded impossible. But when you've burned every bridge leading back to your castle, even a prince learns what it feels like to stand outside the gate. Let's rewind for a moment. Before the wedding, before Oprah, before Netflix, there was a time when Harry was considered the fun one, the human one. His mischief was charming, his candor refreshing. People loved him because he didn't seem royal in the rigid, polished sense. He was real. But realness, in the world of crowns and cameras, has a price. And the moment Harry fell in love with Meghan Markle, the balance shifted. The public narrative turned. Suddenly, he wasn't the lovable rogue. He was the reckless prince, the one who might drag the monarchy into chaos. And when he and Meghan chose to speak their truth on global television, that chaos became reality. The royal family operates by an ancient rule: never complain, never explain. But Harry and Meghan did both. They exposed what others endured silently. And in doing so, they crossed a line that the crown never forgives: airing the monarchy's secrets. It wasn't just scandalous, it was sacrilege. And while Charles and William tried to keep their composure publicly, privately, the damage was irreparable. So when Queen Elizabeth passed, and King Charles began restructuring royal finances and titles, the calculus was cold. The monarchy could no longer afford sentimental exceptions. Those who stood with the firm were rewarded. Those who walked away were left to fend for themselves. And Zara, ever discreet, ever dutiful, became the perfect contrast to the wayward Duke of Sussex. Still, there's a cruel irony here. Zara Tindall had never chased royal privilege. She and her husband Mike Tindall, the rugby player with the cheeky grin, built their life outside palace walls. They worked, paid their own bills, and stayed out of controversy. The Queen adored them for it. She once called Zara the most grounded of the lot. And that grounding, over time, earned her something no scandal or interview could destroy: trust. When King Charles elevated her role, it wasn't out of favoritism. It was strategy. A monarchy desperate to survive public skepticism needed faces the people could actually believe in. Zara fit that role better than anyone. Grace without pretension, loyalty without noise. She didn't just inherit a title. She became a symbol of what the new monarchy wants to be. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Harry's world looked very different. The California sun didn't melt the frost between him and his family. The luxurious home, the media deals, the podcast, none of it filled the void of belonging. Money can buy comfort, but not legacy. And when his royal financial ties were cut, the contrast between the golden past and his present isolation became brutal. Even the Netflix fortune couldn't erase the sting of being written out of the royal inheritance loop. You can almost hear the echoes of his late mother's voice, Diana's warnings about the system, her fears for Harry's future, her hope that love would save him where duty had failed her. And yet, decades later, her youngest son seemed to be living her nightmare in reverse, banished not for rebellion alone, but for his inability to let go of what rebellion had cost him. What makes this twist even more staggering is timing. The royal reshuffle didn't happen in a vacuum. Behind the scenes, King Charles was consolidating estates, redistributing trusts, and redefining who counts as working royal. This was about survival in an era of skepticism. Public trust in the monarchy was wobbling. Scandals, scrutiny, and shifting public values made the crown seem outdated to younger generations. To fix that, Charles needed a new brand: modern, ethical, lean. And Harry, with his lawsuits, interviews, and tell-all memoir, represented everything that brand couldn't afford. But Zara? She was a safe bet. A quiet reformer in riding boots. A woman who could stand on royal soil without stirring old wounds. So while Harry's world unraveled in press statements and paparazzi speculation, Zara's rose with subtle precision. Her name was added to committees, her role expanded in heritage preservation, her face subtly reintroduced in palace communications. One might say she became the crown's insurance policy, the reminder that loyalty doesn't need applause to be rewarded. Still, not everyone in the family was comfortable with the decision. Princess Anne, proud and pragmatic, reportedly hesitated when Charles told her about the plan. She admired her daughter's achievements, but worried the move would draw unwanted attention. And it did. The moment Zara's elevation became public, media outlets exploded with headlines comparing her quiet dignity to Harry's public tantrums. It was a brutal juxtaposition, and one Charles, whether consciously or not, allowed to play out. For Harry, the humiliation was personal. According to one close source, he truly believed that whatever happened, his bloodline ensured some share of the Queen's private estate. But that belief, rooted in centuries of royal tradition, met the new monarch's iron resolve. Charles was determined to prove that privilege without loyalty has no future. And Harry, who had traded both for independence, found himself standing outside the gate he once held the keys to. Was it punishment? Or was it protection, the king drawing boundaries that might, in his mind, save the institution from further collapse? The answer depends on which royal you ask. But one thing's clear, this was not just about money. It was about legacy. And in that battle, Zara won without even fighting. What's more fascinating is how the public has reacted. Some sympathize with Harry, calling him a victim of a cold system. Others see this as justice, a rebalancing of royal karma. You can't insult the family and expect to collect the inheritance, one commentator said bluntly on live TV. The monarchy thrives on these optics. By elevating Zara, they reinforce a moral lesson: loyalty pays, defiance costs. But if the king hoped this move would silence Harry, he miscalculated. Because insiders claim the Duke isn't just angry, he's preparing something. A new revelation, perhaps. A new attempt to reclaim control of the narrative. He feels betrayed, one insider confessed. And betrayal, for Harry, always leads to action. Whatever comes next, it won't be quiet. And as Zara gracefully accepted her new title, humble, smiling, avoiding interviews, the divide within the Windsor bloodline deepened. To the public, she's a heroine. To Harry, she's a symbol of everything he lost. And somewhere in between stands King Charles, a father and ruler, torn between two kinds of love, one loyal to the crown, and one loyal to a son who walked away. So here we are again, watching history replay its favorite themes: loyalty, power, exile, redemption. A family that's never been more fractured, and a monarchy that's never been more desperate to look united. The public sees headlines. The palace sees survival. And Harry? He sees a closed door where once stood his inheritance. But behind that door, secrets remain. Decisions not yet revealed, documents still unsigned, whispers of what Zara's new title truly entails. Because make no mistake, this isn't just about a symbolic honor. It's about a transfer of influence, wealth, and identity. And the way it was done may hold the biggest royal secret since Megxit itself. The ink on Queen Elizabeth's will had barely dried when whispers began to circulate among royal staff. There was something unusual about the inheritance this time. Something that didn't fit the centuries-old tradition. Every royal will, every trust, every estate in the Windsor archive had one thing in common: a code of loyalty embedded so deeply into the system that even blood could not bypass it. And this time, that code had sealed Prince Harry's fate long before he even realized he was playing by the wrong rules. No one in the public truly understands how the royal inheritance works. They imagine gold vaults, castles, and antique crowns, treasures passed from parent to child like a fairy tale. But in truth, royal inheritance isn't about possessions. It's about eligibility. It's about proving, through decades of service and silence, that you are trustworthy enough to hold what represents the crown's endurance. For the monarchy, money is secondary. Control is everything. And Harry, by stepping away, didn't just renounce his duties. He unknowingly voided his right to the invisible web of privilege that comes with them. Imagine growing up being told that the world is yours. That your grandmother's estate, your father's legacy, even your mother's jewels are all part of your future, only to learn, in your late 30s, that you've been erased from the list. That's what insiders say happened to Harry. He believed his inheritance was untouchable, that no matter how far he drifted, his name carried unbreakable rights. But the Royal Inheritance Code, that centuries-old set of private clauses and unwritten customs, had other plans. Let's go back to its origins. The code dates to the time of George III. After decades of scandal, rebellion, and financial ruin caused by reckless princes, the crown created a private mechanism to protect itself. It stated that heirs who publicly dishonored the monarchy or acted against the interest of the crown could be excluded from private inheritance trusts. It wasn't public law, it was tradition wrapped in discretion, enforced by the keeper of the privy purse and the reigning monarch. And it's been invoked quietly through history, from unfaithful dukes to banished cousins. It's the crown's last line of defense, a way to ensure that loyalty, not birth, determines who keeps the family fortune. So when King Charles became monarch, he had a choice. He could ignore precedent, or he could enforce the code that his ancestors created to preserve the throne. And Charles, ever the pragmatist, knew that sentimentality had no place in a monarchy constantly under siege by scandal. Insiders say he began reviewing inheritance allocations within weeks of the Queen's passing. Legal advisors combed through trust agreements. Estates were reassigned. Private letters were sealed. And somewhere in that flurry of signatures, a name was quietly omitted. Prince Henry Charles Albert David of Sussex. Was it personal? Or was it policy? The answer depends on who you ask. Some palace aides insist it was pure protocol, that Harry's decision to step back from royal duties automatically triggered exclusion. Others whisper it was deliberate, a father's painful message to a son who'd gone too far. Charles loved Harry, one former staffer confided, but he also loves the institution. And when the two came into conflict, there was only one choice. Still, there's something hauntingly symbolic about the timing. Just as Harry released his memoir Spare, airing the family's most intimate wounds, palace accountants finalized the documents that would determine royal inheritance lines for the next generation. It's as though the crown waited for Harry's final confession, then silently erased him from the very legacy he thought he was protecting by telling his truth. You might wonder, could a father really do that to his own son? Could King Charles, the man who once spoke about compassion and reconciliation, cut off his child completely? The answer lies in the distinction between public duty and private loyalty. The monarchy doesn't see this as punishment. It sees it as order. When Harry went public, he didn't just criticize individuals. He questioned the very foundation that keeps the monarchy alive. And in doing so, he violated the unspoken oath every royal swears from birth. Protect the crown, even when it hurts you. Here's what makes it even more devastating. Sources close to the royal household revealed that the Queen herself left specific instructions regarding inheritance distribution. Her intention wasn't to punish, but to protect stability. She feared division, one archivist claimed. She wanted Charles to ensure the monarchy wouldn't fracture financially the way it had emotionally. To fulfill that wish, Charles had to make hard decisions. Those decisions, painful as they were, followed the letter of the Royal Inheritance Code, not the sentiment of a grieving family. So what exactly did Harry lose? Let's strip away the myth and look at the real assets. The Queen's private fortune, valued at over £400 million, is divided between estates, jewelry, and confidential trust funds. The Duchy of Lancaster, now under King Charles, provides income for the monarch. The Duchy of Cornwall, traditionally for the heir apparent, is controlled by Prince William. Meanwhile, other family members benefit from discretionary trusts tied to ancestral estates like Sandringham and Balmoral. Zara Tindall, through her mother's line, was connected to one such trust, the Queen's Equestrian Heritage Fund. Over time, her involvement grew. And under Charles, that trust expanded into a new entity, the Royal Heritage Foundation, over which Zara was granted administrative oversight, a symbolic yet powerful gesture of faith. Harry, on the other hand, had no such position, no trust role, no estate attachment, just a symbolic HRH that no longer meant anything legally. His inheritance, in practical terms, was his freedom, and freedom, as he's learned, doesn't pay royal bills. What's even more intriguing is how the process unfolded. Legal insiders suggest that palace solicitors handled the exclusion quietly, ensuring there was no official record linking it directly to punishment. The documents use neutral phrasing, terms like restructuring, redistribution, trust renewal. To the public eye, it looks like modernization. But behind those polished words lies a truth. Harry's name, once engraved on the inside pages of multiple estate documents, was removed. When news of the changes reached Montecito, Harry reportedly felt physically ill. Meghan, ever protective and strategic, wanted to respond, to demand clarity, even consider legal recourse. But how do you sue an institution built on secrecy and tradition? Every document, every decision, is protected under royal immunity. The crown does not answer to its family members. It acts in its own interest. That's the cruel genius of the system. It's unbreakable because it was designed to outlive emotion. Imagine sitting in a Californian mansion, staring at a letter from your father's legal team, only to realize it isn't an invitation to reconciliation, but a formal notification that your claim to legacy has been voided. No personal message, no explanation, just a polite acknowledgement of your existence. and a reminder that your decisions have consequences. That's the moment insiders say Harry broke down. He wasn't crying over money. He was mourning relevance. Here's the bitter irony. Harry once said he wanted to break free from royal constraints, to live as an independent man. But independence, it turns out, means losing access to everything that once defined you. The palaces, the jewels, the family archives, they're not just property. They're symbols of belonging. And for someone who spent his entire life measured by titles, losing them meant losing identity. You can strip a man of wealth and he'll recover. Strip him of legacy, and he becomes a ghost. Even now, the public doesn't fully understand the scale of the loss. It's not just about inheritance. It's about erasure from future history. When royal historians compile the official lineage records, when plaques are engraved, when funds are allocated, Harry's name will not appear. Generations from now, schoolchildren might read about William, Zara, George, and Charlotte, but not the Duke of Sussex. The crown has a way of tidying up its past, leaving no trace of those who chose the wrong side of loyalty. But why Zara? Why elevate her now, when the optics risk reopening old wounds? Insiders suggest Charles wanted a new symbol of continuity, someone untarnished by controversy, someone who could embody the idea of duty without demanding recognition. Zara, with her discipline and discretion, fits the mold perfectly. Her appointment wasn't just a reward, it was a replacement. In the new royal order, Zara occupies the emotional space Harry once filled, warm, relatable, dependable. And that's what stings the most. She didn't steal his inheritance. She earned what he abandoned. There's also a strategic dimension. The Royal Heritage Foundation isn't just a ceremonial trust. It's linked to royal investments, land preservation, and cultural initiatives once tied to Queen Elizabeth's personal estate. By granting Zara oversight, Charles ensures control remains within trusted family lines, while sending a message to the world that the monarchy rewards quiet service, not public rebellion. The contrast couldn't be starker. And yet, beneath all the polished explanations and official statements, there lingers a darker truth. Some insiders claim there was a secret clause in the new inheritance structure, one that explicitly barred any individual residing permanently outside the Commonwealth without consent of the Crown from participating in royal trusts. If true, that clause doesn't just exclude Harry, it ensures his children, Archie and Lilibet, have no future claim either. In other words, the line ends with him. That's the real heartbreak. For all his rebellion, Harry's greatest motivation has always been his children. He wanted to protect them from the very machine that shaped him. But by walking away, he may have unintentionally cut them off from the legacy he wanted them to understand. They may grow up knowing their father was a prince, but they'll never inherit what that title once promised. Every institution, no matter how ancient, has its way of enforcing silence. For the monarchy, that way is financial. The inheritance code isn't written on paper, it's written in consequence. It's a quiet erasure that punishes not through scandal, but through omission. Harry's story is a reminder that in the House of Windsor, loyalty is the true currency, and once you spend it, you can't buy it back. But here's where things take an unexpected turn. While the palace finalized its inheritance reforms, something strange began happening behind the scenes. Leaked memos hinted at discrepancies in estate valuations. Certain funds, long thought to be part of the Queen's private holdings, were suddenly unaccounted for. Rumors spread that not everything had gone exactly according to plan, and that a portion of the royal fortune had been redirected somewhere off the books. Who controlled it? No one seemed to know. But some insiders whispered one name, Zara. Could it be that her new title, Keeper of the Royal Heritage Fund, was more than symbolic? Was she now in charge of the assets that once formed the backbone of the family's private wealth? And if so, how deep did her authority run? Deeper, perhaps, than even the king's public acknowledgement suggested? Harry, upon hearing whispers of this hidden redistribution, reportedly reached out privately to his cousin. The details of that exchange remained secret, but one palace aide described it as strained, emotional, and unresolved. Zara's loyalty to the family was unwavering. She wouldn't defy her uncle's will, not even for Harry. And that's where the new chapter of this royal drama begins. Because in trying to protect the crown's legacy, Charles may have set off a chain of events that could unravel it from within. Hidden clauses, secret transfers, and a cousin's unexpected rise. The inheritance code, designed to preserve order, may have just created the monarchy's next scandal. And when Harry learns the full extent of what's been taken, and who now holds what was once his, the storm that follows will shake every pillar of the House of Windsor. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The woman who never wanted a title ends up wearing one that shook the monarchy. While others clawed for attention, Zara Tindall quietly became the royal family's secret weapon, the stable hand who turned into the crown's greatest symbol of dignity. But what most people don't know is that Zara's rise wasn't an accident. It was the result of decades of quiet loyalty, iron discipline, and one royal father's realization that the monarchy needed a new kind of heir, not a prince draped in scandal, but a woman who embodied trust. Who would have imagined it? When you think of Zara, you probably picture her astride a horse, muddy boots, laughter in the air, hair tied back under her helmet. Not a palace gown in sight. That was always the point. She represented everything the monarchy's critics said it lacked: authenticity. She earned her success not from crowns, but from sweat and saddle work. And that very humility became her greatest asset when the crown began to fracture. Let's rewind. Born in 1981, Zara and Elizabeth Phillips came into this world already outside the traditional royal script. Her mother, Princess Anne, rejected titles for her children, a bold move that shocked the establishment, and wanted her kids to have freedom, to live as normal as possible within the royal shadow. It was a choice that raised eyebrows back then, but decades later, it would prove prophetic. Because while her cousins were being groomed to be princes and dukes, Zara was learning something more valuable: how to be her own person. She attended Gordonstown, just like her grandfather Prince Philip had, and later became one of the most accomplished equestrians in the world. Her Olympic silver medal wasn't handed to her. It was earned through grueling discipline. In the royal world, where appearances often outweigh effort, Zara flipped the script. She didn't represent the monarchy through speeches or ceremonies. She represented it through action, through the kind of excellence that didn't need to be photographed. And yet, beneath that calm surface, there was always a quiet tension. Zara was royal blood, yes, but she was also an outsider to the system. She lived among them, but not like them. She saw both worlds, the pageantry and the price. Maybe that's why the Queen adored her so deeply. Elizabeth II saw in her granddaughter something she'd always admired but rarely seen in modern royals: restraint. Zara didn't talk to tabloids. She didn't chase headlines. When scandal broke elsewhere in the family, her name was never in the mix. She just kept working, kept smiling, kept her head down. That kind of steadiness doesn't go unnoticed in Buckingham Palace. When Queen Elizabeth began entrusting Zara with small heritage responsibilities, oversight of certain charity horses, ceremonial roles in equestrian events, no one thought much of it. But those gestures were quiet tests. The Queen was watching. She was measuring Zara's patience, her loyalty, her ability to hold power without flaunting it. And Zara passed every test. By the time King Charles ascended the throne, the royal family was split in spirit. William and Kate were the future, but they were overexposed. Harry and Meghan were the exiles. Andrew was radioactive. The rest were too minor to matter. Charles needed someone steady, someone with clean hands, someone who could symbolize tradition without controversy. Zara was the perfect choice, an untitled royal who had earned respect from both the institution and the public. But there's something hauntingly ironic about Zara's rise. While Harry rebelled against the royal system that suffocated him, Zara was embraced precisely because she stayed outside it. She never needed to scream for independence. She lived it from birth. She never criticized the monarchy because she didn't rely on it. And in that quiet contrast, Charles found his answer. Where Harry had become the cautionary tale, Zara became the royal redemption story. People close to the king say he's always admired his niece's work ethic. Unlike many royals, she doesn't rely on the taxpayer. She works with sponsors, runs events, and contributes to charitable projects without fanfare. She's modern without being rebellious, one Palisade said. She's everything Harry could have been if he'd stayed calm. But this new title, the one that blindsided the world, wasn't just a pat on the back. It was a calculated move in a chess game centuries old. King Charles has always been obsessed with legacy, with securing the monarchy's survival in the modern age. He knows public patience with royal excess is thinning. So what better way to reinforce relevance than by elevating someone like Zara, untitled, relatable, hardworking? It sent a powerful message. The monarchy rewards loyalty, not entitlement. Behind closed doors, however, that decision stirred discomfort. Princess and reportedly hesitated when Charles brought it up. She never wanted her daughter dragged into royal politics. She's earned her peace, and supposedly told him. But Charles saw the bigger picture. The crown needs her, he replied. And he wasn't wrong. In a world where the monarchy's reputation has been shredded by scandal after scandal, Zara's image is pure gold. Still, there's another layer to this story. Charles's gesture wasn't just about modern optics. It was about trust and control. By granting Zara oversight of the Royal Heritage Foundation, he secured a bloodline bond. The foundation's assets include historical estates, royal archives, and, more controversially, access to funds previously tied to Queen Elizabeth's personal fortune. To outsiders, it looked symbolic. To insiders, it was a massive transfer of responsibility and influence. Think about that. Zara Tindall, the untitled granddaughter of the Queen, now has access to heritage documents and estate management privileges that even senior royals never touch. It's not just a promotion, it's a power shift. And for Harry, hearing that was like a thunderclap. The cousin who never wanted a crown now stood closer to the Queen's legacy than he ever would again. What makes it even more emotional is that Zara never asked for any of it. Those who know her say she was hesitant, even uncomfortable with the spotlight that followed the announcement. Zara doesn't like fuss, one friend said. She just wants to do the job right. That humility, ironically, only made the public love her more. She represented something rare, a royal who didn't seem to crave being royal. Contrast that with Harry. Every interview, every documentary, every speech, he said he wanted privacy, yet couldn't stop talking. The more he spoke, the more isolated he became. The more Zara stayed silent, the more powerful she appeared. It's a cruel paradox that the monarchy understands all too well. Silence in the right hands becomes strength. For centuries, royals have known that words can destroy dynasties faster than wars. Zara's restraint wasn't just personality, it was strategy, even if she didn't intend it that way. There's also a human side to her story that makes her even more compelling. Zara has faced her own struggles. Injuries that nearly ended her career, financial setbacks, balancing motherhood with competition. She's not immune to hardship, but she endures it privately. That resilience has made her a symbol of the kind of stoicism the late Queen embodied. In a way, Zara became the bridge between the monarchy's past and its uncertain future, a woman who could carry old values into a new world. But let's not mistake her composure for naivety. Zara knows the weight of what she's been given. Sources close to the family say she understands the political undercurrents behind her new role. She knows that her name is now part of a narrative that pits her quiet loyalty against her cousin's loud rebellion. And though she'd never say it publicly, some believe she feels a mix of guilt and sadness over how things turned out. She loves Harry, one insider said, but she also knows the family had to move on. Someone had to step up. And if it wasn't her, it would have been someone outside the bloodline. There's a line that keeps echoing in royal circles. The crown abhors a vacuum. When someone leaves, someone else must fill the void. Harry left. Zara filled it. It's that simple, and that tragic. Meanwhile, the media has turned her into a modern saint. The royal who saved the monarchy, read one headline. Zara, the Queen's spirit lives on, read another. Even among critics of the monarchy, there's a grudging respect for her authenticity. While Harry's headlines are filled with lawsuits and controversies, Zara's are about charity, sport, and quiet grace. The contrast couldn't be sharper or more useful to the palace's image machine. But beneath the surface, this coronation of sorts has a shadow. Some royal watchers believe Zara's new title is more dangerous than it looks. By stepping into the royal structure she once stood outside, she risks being pulled into the very machinery her mother protected her from. And the closer she gets to power, the more scrutiny will follow. Already, there are whispers about how her new trust position overlaps with financial operations once tied to the Queen's private wealth. Some call it coincidence. Others call it consolidation. Either way, Zara's role may not remain as peaceful as she hopes. Inside the palace, alliances are shifting. Camilla reportedly supports Zara's elevation wholeheartedly, seeing her as the monarchy's best female asset. William, ever the strategist, understands the move's optics but remains cautious. He trusts her, one aide said, but he's also watching her. The king himself, though proud, is said to be quietly testing Zara, observing how she handles pressure, whether she can carry the weight of the crown's unspoken rules. In the monarchy, every reward is also a test. And then there's Harry. Across the ocean, he watches it all unfold through news clippings and insider whispers. Every photograph of Zara smiling beside Charles must feel like salt on an open wound. She's living the life of royal balance he once dreamed of, a life close enough to power to matter, yet free enough to breathe. She represents everything he tried to be before it all fell apart. For a man defined by defiance, seeing loyalty rewarded in someone else must sting. Still, there's something deeper than jealousy here. There's regret. Harry knows Zara never betrayed him. They grew up together, shared holidays, laughter, losses. They were close. When Diana died, Zara and her brother Peter were among the few who truly understood his grief. For years, they remained allies in a family where emotion was currency rarely exchanged. But as Harry drifted away, communication faded. And now, in the wake of the inheritance debacle, their paths have diverged completely, one toward influence, the other toward exile. If this feels like Shakespearean irony, that's because it is. The crown doesn't just divide power, it divides people. It turns cousins into contrasts, loyalty into leverage. Zara didn't ask to replace Harry, but the system demanded a new face of reliability. She became it. The moment her name was attached to that royal decree, her life changed forever, and so did the monarchy's image. What the world doesn't yet know, however, is that Zara's new title comes with secrets that even she doesn't fully understand. The Royal Heritage Foundation's financial ledgers hold more than estate records. They hold connections to funds that trace back to the Queen's private accounts, and even earlier, to the era of Edward VIII's abdication settlements. Money that vanished decades ago is suddenly being traced again, and the name authorized to oversee those transactions? Zara Tindall. Why would Charles entrust her with something so sensitive? What does he know that the public doesn't? And more importantly, what happens when Harry learns that the foundation his cousin now manages may contain assets that once belonged to his mother's legacy? Because make no mistake, this isn't just about recognition. It's about inheritance, control, and buried family truths. And while Zara's quiet demeanor shields her from scandal, the forces she's now entangled with won't stay silent forever. The king's decision was meant to bring peace, but it may have just set the stage for the next royal reckoning. And when that reckoning comes, the cousin who never wanted a title may become the one who bears the heaviest crown of all. It wasn't a grand banquet. No cameras, no trumpets, no palace press release. Just a private dinner at Highgrove House. A family gathering that was supposed to be quiet, familiar, even comforting. But what unfolded that evening would reshape the royal order and leave one man across the ocean reeling. For in that single meal, a conversation turned into a coronation, and an unspoken decision became official. Zara Tindall would step into the light, and Prince Harry would be left in the dark. Highgrove has always been Charles's sanctuary. Unlike Buckingham or Windsor, it breathes warmth instead of protocol. Low lamps, soft chatter, laughter from the gardens when the wind is kind. That night, though, there was none of that. The air carried something heavier. Even the staff felt it. Palace aides whispering in the corridors that the king had something personal to say. Camilla arrived first, graceful but tense, her expression betraying that she knew what was coming. Princess and followed, firm as ever, her stride brisk, her face unreadable. Then came Zara and Mike Tindall, dressed modestly, unaware they were walking into a royal recalibration. At the far end of the table sat King Charles, his glasses perched low, an old letter from the Queen beside his plate. He wasn't reading it. He didn't need to. He knew every word. Duty first. Family next. Feelings last. It was advice she'd given him in one of their final private talks, the same principle she had ruled by. Tonight, he would follow it. Dinner began as they always did. Small talk about the grandchildren, horses, the weather. But the pauses between sentences grew longer, and kept glancing at her brother, sensing the weight he was carrying. Camilla sipped her wine, but spoke little. Zara laughed softly at something Mike said, her warmth cutting the tension, if only for a moment. And then Charles cleared his throat. "Before dessert," he said, his voice measured, "I have something to share." The table went still. Even the flicker of the candles seemed to hesitate. He looked at Zara first. "You've been carrying the spirit of this family quietly, without demand or complaint," he began. "Your grandmother admired that in you more than she ever said aloud." He paused, his eyes lowering to the letter beside his hand. It was her wish that certain responsibilities, those concerning the preservation of heritage, be passed to those who embody her values. And straightened, wary. "Responsibilities?" she asked carefully. Charles nodded. "The Royal Heritage Foundation. I've decided it's time to name its next overseer." The silence that followed was sharp enough to slice glass. For years, that position had been symbolic, a ceremonial title tied to the Queen's personal estate. Camilla leaned forward slightly, her voice smooth but edged. "Are you sure that's wise, darling? It's a significant role." Charles smiled faintly. "Exactly why it belongs with someone significant." Anne's jaw tightened. "You mean to give it to my daughter?" "Yes," Charles said simply. "Effective immediately." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Zara blinked, stunned. What? That's not. Uncle, I don't think." Charles raised a hand. "You've earned this, Zara. Your dedication, your discretion, your loyalty to family. It hasn't gone unnoticed. This isn't a gift. It's an acknowledgement." Mike reached for her hand under the table. He knew the gravity of what this meant even before she did. Zara, who had spent her life deliberately outside royal politics, was now being pulled into its very core. And exhaled slowly. "Charles," she said, her tone calm but firm, "you know she never wanted any of this." "I know," he replied, "and that's precisely why she deserves it. The ones who don't seek power are often the ones best suited to hold it." Camilla's gaze flickered briefly to Anne, then to Zara. There was something calculating in her expression, not jealousy, but awareness. She understood what this meant. Zara's appointment wasn't just a family gesture. It was a move on the royal chessboard. A shift in image, in trust, in succession optics. The king had just chosen his symbol of integrity, and it wasn't his son. Dessert arrived, but went untouched. The conversation turned formal. Charles outlining how Zara would serve as the new keeper of the Royal Heritage Fund. There would be paperwork, introductions, briefings. But the decision, he said, was already sealed. "It will be made public quietly," he added. "A private announcement to the household, then the press in due time." Anne's eyes met his across the table. "And Harry?" she asked softly. The question hung in the air. Charles's fork froze midair, his lips tightening. For a moment, the king looked not like a monarch, but like a father, tired, conflicted, heart heavy with consequence. "Harry," he said after a pause, "has chosen a different life. I can't stop him from walking his path, but I can't let him walk this one." Zara's face fell. "He's still family," she whispered. "Always," Charles said, his tone gentler. "But family doesn't always mean inclusion and duty." He made his choice. "I must make mine." That's when Anne realized this wasn't just about a foundation. It was about inheritance. About who the king trusted to carry the crown's legacy when he could no longer do so. Zara wasn't replacing a title. She was replacing a function, one that used to be Harry's by blood. After dinner, the family moved to the sitting room, where conversation softened but the weight of the decision lingered like perfume. Charles stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames, and joined him quietly. "You know this will cause trouble," she murmured. He nodded. "Everything does these days." "He'll see this as betrayal." "I know." "Is it?" she asked. Charles looked into the fire, his reflection dancing in the glass. "No," he said softly. "It's self-preservation." Meanwhile, Zara sat by the window, the night pressing against the glass. Mike leaned over and whispered, "You okay?" "I don't know," she said truthfully. "It feels wrong. I never wanted to take anything from anyone." "You didn't," he said. "You earned it." But in her chest, something twisted. She couldn't stop thinking of Harry. How many summers they'd shared running through Balmoral Gardens, laughing, daring each other into mischief. They'd grown up like siblings. And now, her name was about to become the headline that would hurt him most. Outside, the wind picked up. The flags over Highgrove rustled in the dark, as if echoing what everyone felt but couldn't say. that something irreversible had just happened. By the time the family departed, Charles stayed behind in his study, reading over documents his secretary had left. Among them was an updated copy of the Royal Heritage Fund Charter. He ran his finger along the clause that had caused so much internal debate, the clause that would, from that night forward, exclude any royal residing outside Commonwealth territories from accessing family trusts. He hesitated, then signed it. The pen scratched quietly across the page. One stroke, one signature, one severed bond. Later that evening, as aides cleared the table and the last of the lights dimmed, Zara's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. The words were few, but the meaning was unmistakable. So it's true. No name, but she didn't need one. It was Harry. Her heart sank. She typed and erased half a dozen replies before settling on the truth. I didn't ask for it, Harry. The dots appeared, then vanished. No reply. For days afterward, that dinner haunted her. The warmth of family now felt like the beginning of something colder, an invisible divide she hadn't meant to create. When the official announcement quietly surfaced weeks later, she watched the world react from the corner of her phone screen. Royal commentators praised her grace. The tabloids called it a refreshing new chapter. But between the lines of every glowing headline was the one truth she couldn't ignore. Her new title came at the cost of someone else's peace. In Montecito, Harry saw the same headlines. He read the words Zara Tindall appointed keeper of the Royal Heritage Fund and felt something inside him break. Keeper, he muttered aloud, the word bitter on his tongue. He'd spent his life being told he was one of the keepers of the crown. Now, even that identity was gone. When Meghan asked him what was wrong, he just handed her the phone. She read the headline silently, her eyes hardening. So they've replaced you, she said quietly. With her. Harry didn't answer. He just stared out the window, the California sunlight falling across his face, a world away from the candlelight of Highgrove. For the first time, he understood what exile truly meant. Not distance, but displacement. Back in London, Charles carried on as though nothing had changed. But those closest to him could sense the toll. At council meetings, his tone was sharper, his patience thinner. He told aides that the future of the crown depends on discipline. Yet late at night, he was often seen pacing, alone, rereading old letters from Diana. Letters filled with hope that their sons would one day support each other. Now, one was lost to resentment, and the other was bound to duty. History, it seemed, had repeated itself in cruel symmetry. As weeks turned into months, Zara embraced her role quietly. She met with historians, charity leaders, archivists. The Foundation's archives opened to her, a world of private royal history few had ever seen. Among the files were financial ledgers from the Queen's personal estates, letters from Winston Churchill, and even photographs from early post-war royal tours. But in one locked cabinet labeled Confidential Trust A, Zara found something curious, a file marked with an unfamiliar code. When she asked the clerk about it, he hesitated. That file, he said carefully, pertains to assets formerly connected to Princess Diana's charitable portfolio. It's restricted. She nodded, pretending to understand. But a small voice inside her whispered a truth she couldn't ignore. Diana's fund. Harry's mother. The same fund rumored to have been absorbed quietly into the royal trusts after her death. Why was it still locked? And why was it under the foundation she now oversaw? For the first time, Zara felt a chill, not from guilt, but from realization. Maybe this wasn't just about rewarding loyalty. Maybe it was about burying something else entirely. As the sun set over Highgrove that night, the king sat alone again, staring at the empty chair across from him, the one Harry used to fill at family dinners. The fire crackled, and in the reflection of the flames, he saw two faces, Zara, loyal and steady, and Harry, distant and defiant. Both his blood, both his legacy, but only one within his reach. He whispered under his breath, "May history forgive me." He didn't know Zara had found that locked cabinet. He didn't know Harry would soon learn of it too. And when he did, the dinner that changed everything would come back to haunt them all. Because the truth buried in those files wasn't meant to stay buried. And once it surfaced, no royal decree could contain it. When Prince Harry first landed in California, the world called it liberation. Cameras caught him smiling under the sun, Meghan's hand in his, a new baby in tow, an ocean breeze replacing the chill of British tradition. He was finally free, or so it looked. But freedom, as he would soon learn, doesn't come without a price. Because beneath the laughter, beneath the Netflix deals and mansion photo shoots, there was a truth gnawing at him. He had traded belonging for independence, and the bargain was starting to feel like a curse. At first, it was intoxicating. Montecito was everything the palace wasn't: casual, warm, overflowing with palm trees instead of protocols. For a man raised under a microscope, the silence of California mornings felt like salvation. He could walk down the street without bowing, take his son to the park without photographers hidden in the bushes. The American press called him Prince of the People. He liked that. It sounded better than spare. But the shine didn't last long. Within months, the headlines began to sour. The documentaries that were supposed to tell their truth were mocked for being self-indulgent. Meghan's podcast stalled. Their Netflix deal, once worth millions, became a ticking clock for deliverables. Freedom had turned into a business, and business was failing. Still, Harry tried to convince himself it was worth it. "We're building something new," he'd tell Meghan at night. "Something better." But each morning, when he opened his phone and saw palace updates, William at official engagements, Zara receiving her new royal title, his father photographed smiling in Scotland, he felt the distance grow. It wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. They were moving on, and he was fading out. California wasn't home. It was a refuge built on exile. Imagine that. Waking up in a mansion larger than Highgrove, yet feeling smaller than you ever did inside the palace walls. The marble floors echo, the chandeliers glitter, but the silence feels wrong. No staff bustling, no duty schedule, no ringing of royal briefings. Just quiet. Too much of it. Meghan filled that void with projects, scripts, ideas, media ventures. Harry filled it with nostalgia. He'd wander the garden, lost in thought, sometimes picking up acorns and remembering the ones he collected with William at Balmoral. Those tiny moments, meaningless to most, became the only memories that still felt real. He had thought distance would heal him. It didn't. It magnified everything he left behind. Friends who once called weekly stopped answering. Old allies grew cautious. Even the military veterans he championed during his Invictus Games began to drift, quietly choosing allegiance to the institution rather than the individual. The phone grew quieter each month, until silence became its own kind of noise. Meghan, ever the strategist, saw the unraveling before he did. "You can't keep looking back," she told him one night, her tone somewhere between frustration and fear. "They've moved on, Harry. So should we." But he couldn't. Not when every new headline reminded him that the monarchy he'd fought to leave was thriving without him. Worse, he wasn't missed. And then came the news of Zara's appointment. It hit like a hammer to the chest. He saw it not through an official announcement, but a push notification from a royal correspondent on Twitter. King Charles appoints Zara Tindall as keeper of the Royal Heritage Fund. The words blurred. His hand tightened around his phone. Meghan found him standing by the window, pale and trembling. "They've replaced me," he said softly. "I've been erased." "Harry, no one's replaced you," she began, but he cut her off. "She's the one now, the one they trust, the one who represents what I used to stand for." It wasn't jealousy. It was grief. The realization that his role in the family had been rewritten by his own father, no less. And Zara, his cousin, the one who had always been closest to him, was now the symbol of everything he'd lost. He didn't call her. He didn't need to. He knew she'd feel the weight of it too. They had shared too much history for this to be easy. But the palace doesn't leave room for personal feelings. It rewards loyalty, punishes defiance, and forgets those who walk away. Harry, once its favorite son, had become a ghost. To the public, though, things still looked perfect. The Sussexes posted smiling photos, carefully curated, with captions about compassion and growth. But behind the scenes, reality was unraveling. The Netflix producers were growing impatient. Their new projects weren't landing, and the lifestyle that once felt empowering now carried a suffocating irony. They had escaped the royal system, only to build one of their own, this time controlled by contracts, metrics, and streaming deadlines. "Maybe we should go back," Harry muttered once, half joking, half despairing. Meghan froze. "Go back," she said sharply. "To what? To being controlled? To being humiliated?" Her eyes burned. "We left for a reason." He didn't respond. But deep down, he knew she misunderstood. He wasn't talking about returning to the system. He was talking about returning to family, the people, the familiarity of duty. The structure that had once suffocated him now felt like the only thing keeping him sane. That's the cruel trick of freedom. It gives you choice, but it takes away identity. Even friends in Hollywood could sense his discomfort. He's not built for this, one executive said after a dinner party. He's polite, charming, but you can tell he's adrift. Meghan's in control, but he's searching. Searching for what? For purpose. For a reason to wake up that isn't tied to scandal or survival. The monarchy had stripped him of relevance, and relevance, for someone raised in the spotlight, was oxygen. The night Zara's news broke publicly, Harry couldn't sleep. He scrolled through articles, headlines, photos of his cousin smiling with Charles. She looks happy, he said aloud, almost as if trying to convince himself not to feel bitter. Meghan frowned. Of course she looks happy. They've given her everything they took from you. Harry didn't reply. He simply closed the laptop and went outside. The California night was warm, the stars bright, but his mind was miles away, in cold London corridors, in Highgrove's candlelight, in memories of laughter that now felt like dreams. He thought of his mother. What would Diana say if she were here? Would she tell him to fight back, or to forgive? The image of her flashed before him, not as the glamorous princess the world adored, but as the protective mother whispering, "Don't let them change you, Harry." And yet, somehow he had. He had become the very thing she warned him about, a man defined by what he'd lost. Over time, that sense of loss began to show. Insiders noticed his temper growing shorter, his words sharper. In meetings with his staff, he grew impatient, distracted. Meghan took on more of the public role, while he drifted further inward. Their home, once alive with ambition, started to feel like a museum of intentions. Framed photos of royal childhoods sat beside California art, a mix of two worlds that no longer fit together. Then came the letter. It arrived through official channels, sealed with the royal crest, simple and impersonal. A notification of formal inheritance reallocation. That's how the palace phrased it. No apology, no explanation, just confirmation that his exclusion was complete. The assets once connected to his name were now under different management. It was final. He read it 3 times, hoping he'd misunderstood. But the message was clear. Whatever chance he'd had of reconciliation, financial or familial, was gone. His name wasn't just missing from the list. It was erased from the system. For the first time, Meghan saw him cry. Not angry tears, but quiet, defeated ones. "They've locked me out," he said. "Even Mum's things, her charities, her trusts, they're all under their control now." She tried to console him, but something deeper than sadness had taken root. Humiliation. He had walked away thinking he'd freed himself from control. But the monarchy had simply waited, patient as always, and when the time came, it reclaimed everything. In the following weeks, Harry withdrew further. Calls to old friends went unanswered. Emails to palace aides were politely declined. Even attempts to reconnect through intermediaries failed. It was as if a curtain had dropped, separating him permanently from the only world he'd ever known. And that's when the paranoia began. It started small, a comment overheard at an event, a suspicious journalist email, a photograph that appeared online a day too soon. He began to suspect leaks. Meghan dismissed it at first, but when one of their private phone conversations was quoted in a tabloid, she panicked too. "Someone's watching us," he whispered one night. Someone inside. The irony was bitter. He had left the surveillance of the palace, only to feel more exposed than ever. Meanwhile, Zara's image blossomed in the UK press. The modern royal face of loyalty, one magazine called her. Another dubbed her the people's niece. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Zara the humble heir, Harry the Hollywood exile. And yet, deep down, part of Harry didn't hate her. He envied her simplicity, the peace of being close to the family without being consumed by it. He wondered if that could ever be him again. But that thought was quickly drowned out by something darker. Because as he reread the inheritance letter, one detail caught his eye, a reference number. Trust code A19. The same code he'd seen years ago on one of Diana's private foundation files, the same one he thought had disappeared after her death. What was it doing in his exclusion notice? That night, unable to sleep, he started digging. Old files, public records, archived charity documents. The deeper he went, the the more questions emerged. And one pattern stood out. The name of the foundation that now held what was once Diana's, the Royal Heritage Fund, Zara's foundation. Suddenly, it clicked. His exclusion wasn't random. It was redirection. Assets once tied to his mother's name had been absorbed under a new structure and placed in the hands of someone who wouldn't question it. Someone trusted. Someone loyal. Zara. He closed his laptop, his hands trembling. He wasn't angry at her. Not yet. He was angry at the pattern. The monarchy's old habit of hiding truth under family gestures. He could almost hear the palace spin. It's about heritage, not money. But for Harry, it was personal. His mother's legacy, once his last link to belonging, had been quietly reassigned. He poured himself a drink, staring at the Montecito horizon. "They think I won't fight back," he whispered. "But they're wrong." Freedom, it turned out, had given him one weapon the crown could never control: his voice. And this time, he intended to use it not for pity, but for proof. Because what started as a dream of escape had become something else, a mirage. And behind that mirage, the truth about inheritance, loyalty, and the monarchy's darkest secrets was waiting to be revealed.